Hello and welcome to Tips for Teaching STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, and math, to non-science teens. This is a workshop hosted by Julie Polanco, that's me, from Julie Naturally. Welcome. All right, so let's just get right into it. When we're talking about teenagers, we're talking about high school. We're not talking about middle schoolers. And when we're thinking about planning out what we're going to do for science for our teens, we need to start at the end. So first thing to think about is, what is your teen's skill set? What are their gifts, talents, interests? What do they hope to do with themselves when they're done? Some teens don't really know what they want to do, but they know that they don't want to be a doctor, they don't want to be an engineer. They're, kind of cruising along, but they know that they're not interested in anything like that. But take the time to think about, what does your teen naturally gravitate towards? And, talking on their phone and playing video games don't count. So what other kinds of things do they do? Do they seem to be interested in? What subject areas that you have studied in the past do they seem to be most excited about? And that will give you some ideas with that. And as you think about that, as you talk with your teen about that, because of course you can have these conversations with them, you could start to think about, well, does what my teen generally veer toward require college? I generally request that parents really consider very carefully the college question. There are a lot of young people out there these days working minimum wage jobs with degrees in history, art, communication, psychology, things like that. I really would recommend very strongly that you consider that question carefully. So if they're interested in design or art or any of those topics that I just mentioned, there are much more economical ways to pursue those interests than to go into $40,000 of debt to get a degree that will make it difficult for them to find a job. The next thing to think about is, what does your state require for your science credits? Most states require two high school credits for science. Some states might require 3. And usually one of those needs to be a lab, but not always. Sometimes there's not a lab requirement. So be familiar with what your state requires. Some states consider homeschools to be their own private schools and can set their own standards, but generally they fall in line with what the state requires for their public schools. It's also useful to find out what the private schools in your area require for graduation for their students, just to give you some ideas about what you should be doing with your teen. So if you're taking this workshop, I make a few assumptions. So if you are here, I assume that your teen is not a very sciencey kid, that in fact, maybe they don't even know what they want to do, as we talked about on the previous slide. Because if they already know that they want to go into a very technical field, they want to be a nurse, they want to be a computer programmer, they want to be a teacher, there is a specific path for them that they need to take. This workshop is for those parents of teens who maybe don't know what they want to do. They are pretty sure they don't want to go into one of those more technical or licensed fields. So they probably are not a super studious student who isn't going to excel with the very college prep style textbook curriculum. And this is also for you, assuming that this is your teen, if you just want to fulfill the state requirements for science. So the 2 years, possibly 4 semesters of science is good for you. You're not looking to do 4 years of science. You're not looking to do the typical format. You're just trying to get your kid through high school, so they have a degree, a diploma, excuse me, and help your child to explore science and get science credits. If your student is looking to be in a technical field, they know already they're going to college, they're going to be entering a licensed field, then this workshop is probably not for you. You're probably not going to find this as useful as the person who, like I just said, their teen isn't super studious and they maybe don't know what they want to do. So just so you know that if you're in the right place, just take a moment to think about that and whether or not this workshop is really going to be helpful for you. So the first hurdle that you need to get over with your non-science teen is, when am I ever going to use that stuff? I think every teen who doesn't really feel that they need science because, well, I'm not going to be looking at cells under a microscope. I'm not going to be building computers. I'm not going to be designing windmills. I'm not going to be doing any of those kinds of things. What do I need to even have any science for? Why do I need this stuff? So the first thing that I always stress is to make sure that what you are doing with that type of teen is relevant. So we want to make sure that whatever we do with science, it's relevant. So as I said in the previous slide, the first tip is to make it relevant. Okay, our teens do not need to take the textbook biology, physics, and chemistry courses. They generally, following this format, is not very relevant to the child who is maybe a computer coder, an animator, an artist, a person who maybe wants to go into the missionary field, maybe somebody who does videography or photography. They're going to say, well, how is this relevant to what I want to do with my life? I'm never going to use this stuff again. I'm never going to look at this stuff again. I'm having trouble here, Mom. What does this have to do with anything? So, but we don't need to throw out all of that. What we do is we look at these main subject areas and we are going to break it down into what types of topics can we find under each of these major themes. And I will explain what I mean by that next. So the second tip is to think outside the box. So first we're going to think about how to make science relevant to what it is that they are interested in, that their skill sets are, that they quite possibly might end up doing with their lives. But we also want to inspire them to think about how their interests and skills can be applied to an area of science. So what we're going to do is we're going to think outside the box when it comes to these subject areas. So if you look at my little circle here, you'll see a number of different micro topics that can be put under each of those major areas that we explored in the previous slide. So under biology, you might study nutrition, horticulture, botany, ecology, environmental science. All of those things might fall under biology. Anatomy is another one. Under chemistry, you might study nutrition, aromatherapy. You might study under the physics, you might study electronics, computer science, alternative energy, optics. There are a lot of ways to break this down into all of the different little subject areas or subtopics that are often covered in a very general way in those areas. So think about how you can relate their skill set to sort of one of these subtopics. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So tip number 3 is to find the science in their interest. So you can see how all of these go together. So you want to make it relevant, you want to think outside the box, and find the science in their interests. Well, how do we do that? So here's a few different kinds of interests that I have listed. My own kids have a lot of strengths in art and music. They love animals and nature. They like to tinker with stuff, but they don't care necessarily about the very technical scientific terms and study behind it, but they do like to tinker a lot. Lots of kids like flowers and lots of kids do like animals, even into their teen years and stuff. I mean, who doesn't like cats and dogs and hamsters and guinea pigs and all those types of things? So you could take a look at some of these things, even if your kid likes to play video games and is really into computers. There are ways to think about the science behind that. Think about the science, the technology, the engineering, the math behind each of those areas. For example, my son is very much into 3D animation. Well, to be able to animate well, you have to have an understanding of physics in terms of motion and impact and force and things like that. And in fact, there are some animation courses that talk about that. You also have to have an understanding of human anatomy. How are you going to create accurate looking 3D characters without an understanding of how muscles and bones work together, how the body is proportioned? Proportion is part of math. Proportion also plays into art and photography. That's just one example of how the science can relate to their interests. If someone is very interested in art, animals, perhaps they might be interested in veterinary science and learning more about how to care for those animals, learning about animal anatomy and physiology, understanding ecology and how animal systems and weather systems and climate systems work together and interact with animals in different habitats. They might also be interested in environmental science for that reason. That would relate to their interest in animals as well. If there's somebody who really likes to tinker around and make stuff from garbage and just build stuff, make stuff. You have somebody who likes to tinker around with machines and things like that. Well, there's a lot of physics that can be involved with that. But there's also alternative energy can be related to that. You could have environmental studies related to that. How do you use renewable energy sources? How do you use recycled materials to make something useful and new? You can relate it that way. Computer science is very much related to tinkering, and computer repair. So the repair and electronics, optics, all those things that fall under physics. But if you break it down a little bit, instead of just taking out a physics textbook, maybe they take a course in electronics and they get to build circuit boards and they get to see how that relates to building computers, and perhaps it sparks a new interest with them for somebody who likes to tinker with stuff. If somebody is interested in natural health or flowers, or they just are really into nutrition and being healthy, some teens are really into being healthy, building their bodies, and guys trying to get buff, and girls into natural skincare and being thin and fit. Well, herbalism, natural health, and aromatherapy, nutrition, all of those things are related to that. And there's quite a bit of chemistry in aromatherapy and nutrition, organic chemistry in particular, but it's in context and it makes it very relevant. So all of those different ways of thinking about the science behind their interest. There's even science in a history buff. Depending on what aspects of history that they are really interested in, you can also relate some aspects of science to history. I have one of those, some examples of that listed here. Geology is very intimately tied to history. Astronomy, people in the past used astronomical signs in the sky to navigate the seas, to set up their calendars, and even superstitious types of things. And ancient engineering. How did the ancients build bridges? How did they build their aqueducts? How did they create buildings that and other structures, pipes and different things that, and even their catapults, their trebuchets, all of those kinds of things. How did they build things, and how did we learn how to improve on those ancient structures? So there's even some engineering in history. So we can find ways to relate their interests to science, to encourage them to see how it's relevant to their interests and to their current lives, how they can take those skills that they learn that are related to their interests and be able to apply them today. So take these as examples. These are some things that to help you begin to think about that and write some of those ideas that you come up with or that you see here into your handout. Okay, now we come to tip number 4, my last tip for this workshop, and that is to focus on skills and experience over theory. I touched on that on the last slide. It's really important with kids like these to really, in order to make it relevant, they have to see how it relates to their lives, and they have to see how am I going to be able to use this information today, right now. And that's why I gave you in your handout and on the screen here some ideas of where you can find the training and education for the things that I mentioned. So, there aren't always textbooks designed for homeschoolers on these topics. So how can you, find ways to train your kid on these different, more relevant skills and topic areas? So here are some ideas. You can find internships or design your own. My daughter was interested in animals. She loves cats. She thought maybe she might like to be a veterinarian. So I talked to a local independent veterinarian, and I asked her, I said, could my daughter come in and shadow you for a week? Some places will allow you to do that for longer than a week. So it doesn't have to be something that is already pre-organized. In fact, some folks recommend that you do try to design your own internship, because you can come up with something much more creative and beneficial that way, and in places where nobody else is trying to get an internship. That's kind of the problem with organized internships, is that everybody's applying for those internships. And sometimes the quote-unquote internship is nothing more than coming in and, getting people's coffee and filing papers and not actually learning anything. So your high school teen can get internship opportunities by designing their own sometimes. You might be able to shadow somebody who does computer repair. You may be able to do what I done with my daughter, shadow a veterinarian, shadow somebody who works in the zoo. I mean, sometimes they will allow that, or they have sort of other kinds of programs that we'll get to in a moment. The next possibility are research projects, and sometimes you can find professors who are working on research projects who are willing to take somebody under their wing unpaid, who has an interest and some knowledge already. So they will allow your team to do some work with them on their research projects. Sometimes you can find organized ones that are, maybe you take a trip or something like that. That's, up to you, of course. But just talking to people in your area can help you with that. Online classes. There are a lot of opportunities online. If you just go through Udemy or Skillshare, or just doing a Google search will very often turn up a number of classes on the topic that your child is interested in. Certificate programs, you can go through your local junior college or even sometimes online and enroll in a certificate program. They have programs in web design that is very relevant to your artsy type teen, that they can just do a certificate program, and very often they'll allow your teen to enroll as young as age 16. University extension programs. I touched on horticulture. I know University of Illinois extension program that we have access to here in the Chicagoland area. You can become a master gardener, and it requires a lot of knowledge of plants and of poisonous plants, of how plants grow, and just all kinds of stuff that is not covered in general biology, and makes a child become very skilled and useful and employable, because they have this knowledge of gardening and horticulture and landscaping. You can also organize apprenticeships with somebody. It's kind of similar to an internship, but apprenticeship is usually applied to more manual labor type skills. But they are becoming more popular even among artistic types of fields. Design apprenticeships, through praxis, where you are actually working with a company that has you there doing actual work, doing customer service and marketing types of work as a paid apprentice. Museums often offer workshops and classes for teens that help them to explore a particular STEM topic. The Museum of Science and Industry near us offers workshops that way. The planetarium near us offers classes that way. My son learned some skills in how to write code for games. He was exposed to some video editing software. My older daughter was exposed to Makey Makey through the museum, and it was free. Sometimes there's a small fee attached. It depends. You can also learn through intensives. These are sort of like week-long camp type environments, in quotes, but they're intensives designed for teenagers that are where they go and they spend basically 30 hours in an intensive study environment where they're learning a particular skill set. Volunteer opportunities can often be a great way to learn skills and explore science opportunities. So if they're volunteering with the zoo, volunteering with a nature center, or volunteering with a nature museum or some other science-related type of museum, or even, like I said, like a nature center or a conservatory type environment, very often they can learn a great deal about a science topic through their volunteer activities. Conferences, kind of similar to an intensive, but those also offer workshops taught by experts, and they're surrounded by experts or other enthusiasts, and that can be a great way to gain some knowledge too. And then, whatever you can think up, whatever your community might offer. One of the things that I will say with this particular type of approach is that you might have to track the hours that your student is spending on these different ways of learning, so that you can give an accurate and truthful record of whether or not they've earned the Carnegie credit, which is about 120 contact hours. If you're just doing a semester, of course, 60 contact hours would be for that. So this graphic is in your handout. So you have this. It might look a little small, so you may still want to take some notes on that. But you have opportunity to take this with you and to kind of brainstorm what's offered in your area and how might you be able to use this approach to help your teen to have relevant, out-of-the-box experiences related to their interests that focus on skills and experience over theory. They will appreciate that more and come away having some employable, marketable skills and experience in addition to fulfilling science credits. Okay, so to just wrap everything up, we're looking at fulfilling probably 2 science credits, which is the same, of course, as 4 semesters. So it can be 4 different kinds of science classes up to that amount. And, as I mentioned in the last slide, we have 4 major tips. So make it relevant, think outside the box, tie it to their interests, and focus on skills and experience. So what is your focus? This way of doing science with your teens focuses on a love of learning. You can do things this way, which may be a little bit more challenging, but it will still get the job done. Or you can choose to do things a little bit easier way, but and just get it done. But it might be more challenging to get your child's cooperation. So I hope that you gain some good, inspiring information from this workshop that will give you some food for thought and give you some tools to help you to take a love of learning approach. And just remember that you may need to do some research on what's available in your area and what's available online and what's going to work with your budget, and what your overall homeschooling philosophy is. I'm sharing from my own experience with my teens and from my philosophy of a love of learning that is relevant and that inspires and that encourages kids to really embrace life and learning and all that there is in this world that is offered. Just suck the marrow out of everything. And it can be hard. I will just put that out there. It can be hard sometimes to do things this way because it does require some research. It does require a little bit more work on the record keeping end. And it can feel a little bit piecemeal. It may require you to drive around a little bit. So take all of those things into account. And I really encourage you to take a collaborative approach with your teen. By this time, they really need to have an active role in what is going on in your homeschool if you haven't done that before. They really need to they need to adopt responsibility for their learning, and they need to begin to take charge of their own futures and their own learning experiences. So you can put them in charge of doing some of this research. You can put them in charge of figuring out carpooling or figuring out how they're going to get to places that they may feel really inspired to try. So I do encourage you to do that and have fun with it. Have fun with it. This is probably one of the most fun times of homeschooling. And even though it seems stressful, I just want to encourage you that it can be really fun because now you are dealing with somebody who is practically an adult and you begin to see some of the fruits of your labor. So have fun with it. Talk with your teen. Show them some of the things that I mentioned in the workshop. And I encourage you to just really run with it. Thank you for listening to this workshop. If you enjoyed this workshop and what I shared, you can visit my website. Don't be afraid to explore and click on the Downloads and Courses button to see what else I have to offer, and enjoy the rest of the workshops. Thank you.